game fan. Some are different than others. We've even seen some teams say, hey, we're only going to do so much because of depth at this position. Usually it's an offensive line issue. But anything in particular you want to see other than just a healthy game, anything in particular of a player you're looking at seeing, and we don't even know how many are going to be protected, whether they play tomorrow or not.
Well, I mean, you might be dismissive of the spring game, but, I mean, do you want me to do the whole next hour on just what I want to look for? Because I could. I mean, there's that many questions with this football team, and I know they're not going to get answered tomorrow, but at least we'll get a little bit of a glimpse.
I'm not dismissive. I'm just saying I could,
I'm not saying that.
I'm not expecting to go watch a game that's 32-30 and a kick the field goal at the end of the game.
Right. I hear people kind of moan about spring games, and you say, like, well, I don't really care about spring game. I'm just saying, like, I mean, it's a spring game. It's fun. It's the last time we're going to see football for the next 5 months. So, I know it's not the sexiest thing in the world and doesn't necessarily mean that much, but it is how they close out the spring. It's how they finish. So I think it is important in that way. If they just called it the 15th practice, maybe people would actually take it more seriously, rather than just calling it a spring game, because that's what it effectively is. It's their 15th and final practice of spring. And in terms of what to look for, I mean, what do the quarterbacks look like for starters? I mean, there's been this battle all spring long that hadn't really seemed like a battle. It seemed more like there's been one army, the Bohannon army, that's been, is kind of running roughshod and kind of leading the way. And then there's the Shapen army that's, been there alongside and has, fought well, but doesn't really seem to be in possession of any momentum in comparison to the Bohannon side. So, Gary looks to be the guy, but what do they both look like tomorrow? Also get to see Kyron Drones, and he'll probably play more tomorrow than he's played in his entire career at Baylor so far. So just being able to see a young player and how they run the offense, because all we saw last year of Kyron Drones was basically, oh my God, somebody's hurt. We need somebody to go in there and take a snap and hand it off. And that's what Kyron Drones did on like 3 or 4 occasions, it felt like, last year. So those guys, I mean, we have no idea what the running back room represents right now, other than just the names involved. So we'll get to see Tay McWilliams. I wonder if we'll see Squirrel Williams. I wonder, now we'll get to see Jordan Jenkins and guys like that at running back. Wide receiver, they have no proven threats there. So what do those guys look like? Offensive line, feel pretty good about that. And then defensively, I mean, and listening to Ron Roberts, and I don't know if you were planning on playing that, but either he or Dylan Doyle would be a great Dylan Doyle was a fantastic freaking interview yesterday, but you got your entire 2 deep on the D-line and him as your middle linebacker returning. And then outside of that, that's pretty strong. But then outside of that, you have a whole bunch of inexperienced or lesser-known players in comparison to the guys who are now headed off to the NFL. So those outside linebackers and that secondary, I'm looking forward to just seeing all those young faces, and the Devin Neals and the Devin Lemire's, and even more of the Al Walcotts, who we started to get to know a little bit last year. So, yeah, I'm looking at a lot, for tomorrow's game. And I know that I'll probably still have a lot of the same questions, but it'll be good just to kind of have a 2-hour period to really just watch, because what we've had otherwise has been like 15-minute, stretches and group drills and things like that.
The best part about the spring game is it's especially for a coaching staff like this one and a head coach who is not he's not giving out depth charts all spring long.
They haven't released a roster.
Yeah, they haven't released a roster. So it'll be the first time that we get to see where they're thinking guys are or should be. What they're doing, where they go. And, it's not going to be, if you're looking for someone to like run for 150 yards in the spring game or something like that, that's not what you should be looking for. No. What you need to look for in the spring game is how are they using guys? What are they trying? Is someone maybe playing in a different position because they want to see how he does in a game type format, a game simulated format? Can he handle that, responsibility, disposition? Those are the things that I look for. If you're looking for anything other than that, then you're going to be disappointed. But because it's gonna be interesting to see, especially with the wide receivers, where we won't get a lot of answers because the guys who are probably up towards a lot of the guys higher on the depth chart have all been injured. But of the guys who can play, who can maybe play a little bit?
Yeah, and let's not act like the spring game hasn't given us a indicator before of what to expect the following season. Do y'all remember the atrocious Matt Rule spring game, and then the following years, like, oh yeah, they're pretty bad. And you know what? We kind of got tipped off. Like, that was a really just kind of not disorganized, but just a not very fluid, spring game. And then the following year, it was not a very fluid football team either. So I'd expect, like you said, most people just focus in on the plays made and just seeing some of these younger guys that we haven't seen much of, and just, seeing some guys, out there playing for the first time in 3-4 months, and for the final time for the next 3-4 months. Just enjoying that is going to be the biggest part. But yeah, getting to see, because like, for example, to Paul's point about positions, everybody acts like, okay, well, Terrell Bernard's gone. Who steps in and plays his spot? Well, technically, Will Williams is one of those candidates, but the thing is he doesn't just slide in and play the Terrell Bernard spot. He slides into the position, but he plays it differently than Terrell Bernard. So it's not like tomorrow's just going to be the defense we saw last year with guys rearranged. No, it's going to be a version of the defense we saw last year in some ways, but it's also going to be all the changes they've made. Like Will Williams said, he's like, I'm not Terrell Bernard. I'm not up on the line of scrimmage and blitzing into the backfield. I'm more of a coverage guy. Well, he's taking Terrell Bernard's spot. So if he's more of a coverage guy and he's being asked to do things differently, well, then by that reasoning, the defense is a little bit different, right?
Well, and that's why perhaps Dave Aranda, when we heard him a week or two ago, talked about putting pressure on the quarterback from what they have in the up front.
Right, so that Will Williams can play in coverage and not have to worry about being, a constant blitzer, a constant guy that's up on the line of scrimmage. So if that's the case and they can accomplish that, because they should be able to with a two-deep returning, and then guys like Cooper Lands, who we haven't even thought about, that Ron Roberts interjected yesterday. If the D-line can do that, well, then this defense is wildly different from last year, because they don't have to send, blitzers from their secondary or from their linebackers constantly like they had to. And that alone changes the entire look. So, yeah, we should start to see some of the early shades of that and kind of what differences those do look like. But it's a different team, man. I mean, there's some familiar faces, but there's a lot of new ones. And, it's a really even mixture of experience and inexperience. So we'll see that tomorrow.
It doesn't mean when the defense is different that it won't be very good. No. It will just be playing, and what they do could be different.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, there's not a Jalen Petrie that's going to come up out of the ground and do the things that he did, and you'll be able to move things around. It's just different. Also, I'll tell you another spring game indicator we got last year. I think last year we kind of got an idea of where they had to go at quarterback. Maybe it wasn't where they intended wanting to go, but, after the spring game last year, it pretty much set the tracks of, look, Jacob Zeno wasn't ready to do that. Gary Bohannon was the best option, and Blake Shapen might be the most complete of all three of those guys. And it kind of played out that way during the season, even though, you can make the argument, is Blake Shapen ready to be a 12-game starter over Gary Bohannon right now? The coaching staff will determine that. But I think we saw that in the spring game last year was, the kind of played out like that.
We also saw the emergence of Abram Smith. So, again, there are things to take away from a spring game. You don't put stock in the final score and the statistics necessarily, but for Baylor, at least tomorrow, there are things to pick up on that are, important to next year, and that will tell us a little bit, or tell us, hey, they better go to the transfer portal and go look at somebody. And I'm looking forward to having that one more opportunity just to talk to Dave Aranda. Hopefully we'll get him in the offseason at some point. I know he doesn't do a ton of interviews, but hopefully we can get him on this show and actually be able to have the opportunity to ask him a bunch of different questions, because there are some things that just haven't had time to ask him really, but we'll be able to get a few tomorrow.
I'll never forget standing in the end zone at the maybe towards the end of last year's spring game. And we know how bad they were running the football in 2020. They couldn't. And all of a sudden you saw this sea part, like Moses, and here comes this running back right through this big, huge, massive hole. Now, that doesn't mean the defensive line was mauled, but it was just a scene of a running back finding what was a big hole and just poof, right straight through. And that, well, we didn't know. Was that just spring game against backups, or was that just what? No, that's what we eventually were going to see with Abram Smith, 1,500-yard school record rushing yards in a season. Well,
and I think also this is not the same Big 12 that they're walking into, so they can't play the same defense. It's air raid central again. If you really look around the Big 12, spread and air raid central. So I think that alone, when you think about Will Williams' comment about being more of a coverage guy than a on the line of scrimmage guy, that's something that comes into play when you start thinking about Texas Tech's running the air raid, and TCU's running the air raid, and we know Sark down at Texas, and we got Levy with the Browse offense, and So, they're going to have a different look that they're facing
West Virginia
this year.
with Graham Harrell.
Yeah, West Virginia with the air raid. So, I mean, it just goes on and on. All these changes in the Big 12 this year. And so it's going to be very interesting. It started to become a defensive conference. And I still, to this day, like yesterday, I saw comments from just, I guess, self-proclaimed college football fans still making, the Big 12 don't play defense jokes. And I'm like, do you even watch college football?
They had 3 of the top 20 defenses last year.
I saw these, and I forget what it was in regards to. It was some random college football post. I don't know if it was like, just one of those off-season things. It's like the top 20, whatever. But I saw fans who were like, yeah, Big 12 in defense. Have you been asleep for like 2 years? Did you not? You clearly did not watch any of football in the Big 12 last season if you're making any kind of a crack about it being the way it was 5 years ago. But with the changes in offense, I think it's going to be a little bit of an in-between of what we've seen the last couple of years with these defenses at Iowa State and Baylor. TCU, maybe not so much now, but what they had going. And now all these fresh offenses that are hoping to flip it back to more of the way that it was.
Well, it will be fun to watch the chess match and see what Baylor does. Their defense as good as they were last year statistically, or when it comes to, you lose a lot of guys that made big plays, but you do have some dudes coming back, and even some that are added to the mix. Player White, obviously, as well, and some of the young. Like yesterday, I text Craig. I was listening to Ron Roberts, and he was talking about Cooper Lance. He was marinating last year. That's my term I use at times for someone who was redshirted. I don't know how effective or good he will be, but Ron Roberts said, hey, don't forget about him. He redshirted for us last year, and it is time. If you're really a program, those who redshirt, when it's time for them to have a chance to make plays or be a part of it, then that is not all of them, but if you get a handful of those to come